Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Connecting Breast Cancer and Nutrition. As a reminder, all lines will be muted. This presentation will be recorded and the YouTube link will be provided to you in a follow-up email. This event is brought to you by the Samaritan Cancer Resource Centers. Our mission is to partner with anyone touched by cancer to provide the support they need to live with strength, determination, and hope into the future. Please submit any questions you may have via the Q&A box. Questions will be monitored throughout the duration of the seminar, and time will be reserved at the end for the presenter to address these questions. A link to a survey will be provided within the Q&A box, so you may give us your feedback regarding today's presentation. Today, we're pleased to have Athena Nofziger as our guest. She is a registered dietitian and board-certified specialist in oncology nutrition with the Samaritan Cancer Program. It is my pleasure to turn this presentation over to Athena. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Annie, for that introduction. I'm glad you guys are all here. I'm excited to talk about nutrition today. And like Annie said, please put some questions in the chat. I would love to have some time at the end to just answer any questions you have about the presentation, or if you just have a random question about nutrition you want to throw in there, that would be great too. So just quickly, the things I'm going to address today. I'm going to talk a little bit about obesity and cancer risk and diabetes and cancer risk, and specifically tie those things into concerns about breast cancer, and then just overall the benefits of weight management. And then at the end, my favorite part, just to get into kind of the bits and pieces about nutrition for a healthy immune system and a healthy microbiome. And the reason I kind of picked this topic is because, you know, when I am working with people and either they're interested in cancer prevention or have a cancer diagnosis, they get asked the question a lot of, you know, what should I be eating? What are the foods I need to be eating? Or what are the foods I need to cut out of my diet? And if any of you have taken nutrition classes with me before, you know that I kind of go from a big picture approach. And so I'm going to be talking about this from kind of a big picture angle of just an overall healthy lifestyle and things you can do for cancer prevention. So that's my reason for kind of touching on these specific topics. All right. Okay, so most of us are pretty familiar with that, you know, as we gain weight, we're at risk for more health conditions. So just this graphic kind of shows a variety of conditions that we're at higher risk for as we gain weight. So asthma, pulmonary embolism, or, you know, blood clots, more back pain, arthritis, we're at higher risk for a stroke, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. But the other thing to consider is that we are at higher risk for different types of cancer. And so this graphic is from the National Cancer Institute and just kind of shows the variety of cancers that we're at higher risk for when we are overweight. This other chart that I have posted here, I'm not sure how well you guys will be able to see it. I think it might be kind of small, so I will explain it. So this comes from the American Institute for Cancer Research, and they put together kind of all the, you know, research that's out there in regards to cancer prevention and prevention of recurrence, and kind of, you know, put it all together for us so that I don't specifically have to go out and read every single research article. So I use this resource quite a bit. At the end of the presentation, I have a website if you're wanting to get more into their information that they offer. But this chart they have here, what I was wanting you to focus on was this column here of red boxes and orange boxes. And so if we're looking over at this key that I have listed, the orange boxes mean that there's a probable increased risk of cancer, and the red boxes mean there's a convincing increased risk of cancer. And so all the things in this column at the very top, it says adult body fatness. So the more like adipose tissue or fat tissue we have in our body, we're at higher risk for different types of cancer. And so then over on the left, it lists the cancer types that we're at higher risk for. Okay, so just, I don't want to get too much science stuff. I started, I had a whole bunch of slides that got pretty into the science behind all this, and then I took them back out because I want to get into the food. But just to give you a reason, like why does this happen? Adipose tissue or fat tissue secretes something called adipokinins, and these are cell signaling molecules produced by our adipose tissue. And they have a lot of roles in our metabolism, energy, inflammation, obesity. But really what I want to talk about today is a little bit on inflammation, and then two of them that are called leptin and adiponectin. So there's a lot more going on there, but these are the kind of three areas that I wanted to talk specifically about in regards to our adipose tissue. Okay, so before I get into the leptin and adiponectin, I want to talk about inflammation for just a minute. So you may have heard the term, like if you go to your doctor or something, like may have heard the term chronic inflammation. So I just want to explain what that means for a minute. So there's acute and chronic. So acute inflammation is, let's say I cut my hand and it gets, red and inflamed. My immune system sends out, special cells to go out there and heal that inflamed cut, and then the inflammation goes away and it has healed. With chronic inflammation, it's something where we have something going on in our body that is constantly needing to be repaired. So just an example I like to use is high blood pressure. So let's say I have high blood pressure. It causes damage to my artery walls. And so my body has to, send out special cells to fix that damage. And then my blood pressure is still high. So the damage keeps occurring. So my body has to keep sending out special cells to fix that damage. So it's kind of your body's in a constant state of trying to fix itself. So that's kind of a real basic definition of chronic inflammation. And so this can be with other things besides high blood pressure. So, arthritis is an example of chronic inflammation, heart disease, diabetes, just a lot of our chronic illnesses we have, our body is in a constant state of trying to fix that. So when we have more of that chronic inflammation going on, our immune system is always kind of working, and our fat cells are actually part of our immune system. So they're releasing these adipokinins to kind of fix this chronic inflammation. But as we have this going on, it also reduces our immune function. So that's something we talk about a lot in regards to, cancer prevention and prevention of recurrence is, making sure that your immune system is working as good as it can. The more our body has to release these adipokinins, it can also increase cancer progression and can also cause resistance to the chemotherapy treatments that you may be doing. So if that doesn't, feel free to post a question about that if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I know it can get confusing, but the basic thing is that when we have more inflammation in our bodies, it just makes kind of a happier area for things to grow that we don't want to grow, and our immune system doesn't work as well as we want it to. Okay, so then into those, the leptin and adiponectin. So those are hormones. And they really are involved in our ability to manage our weight. So leptin is something that is produced by our adipose tissue. So the more adipose tissue we have or fat tissue we have, our body makes more leptin. And so when we have more leptin, this can cause more uncontrolled cell growth. And so we don't want cells growing uncontrollably, and then inhibits apoptosis. So that's a fancy word for cell death, which that doesn't sound like a good thing. But, when our body makes cells, there's a natural cell cycle that it goes through, and then the cells die, and they're supposed to, and then our body makes new healthy cells. So when we have more of this leptin from our adipose tissue, our cells are not going through that healthy cell cycle. They're staying around. And then it also, leptin also promotes angiogenesis. So that's another fancy word. But all that means is that it promotes blood vessel growth to tumors. So that is not something that we want to happen. So the less adipose tissue we have, then we'll have less leptin in our body. All right, and then there's another hormone called adiponectin. And this is actually one that we want more of in our body. This hormone decreases insulin resistance, and I'm going to talk more about insulin resistance. And it also decreases that inflammation that I was talking about. It promotes that promotes that natural cell death. And when we have more adipose tissue, our adiponectin levels are lower. The other thing that goes on is when we have more adipose tissue, this is the primary site of estrogen production. So for the individuals that are concerned about the estrogen receptor positive cancers, this is part of the reason you hear often, maintain a healthy weight, increase your muscle mass, because we want to reduce that adipose tissue. And then also the adipose tissue can cause insulin resistance. So I'm going to move off of the obesity and cancer risk topic and move into talking about insulin resistance. And while I talk about that, I'm also going to address the sugar feeding cancer concern. So within that, I'm going to talk for a minute about what are carbohydrates, how our body normally makes insulin and our normal insulin response, and then also explain what insulin resistance is. Okay, so what are carbohydrates? So they're a naturally occurring part of plants. They provide energy for our muscles and for brain function. And all the carbohydrates that we eat are digested to simple forms called sugars. They provide us with energy. Our main source of fuel that we use is sugar. So it provides all our cells with energy. And then also for storage, so we have some energy stored up when we're not eating, and then also can be stored as fat, which, I know that doesn't sound good, but we all need some fat stores. So when we eat carbohydrates, they get broken down and stored later for us to use as fuel. Some of the sugars that we eat require insulin, which is also a hormone, to enter the cells in order for us to use it for energy. So that's when it's all broken down into, we've digested all the food, it's broken down into glucose and it enters the cell for us to use for fuel. There's three main sugars that we eat after all our foods have been digested and broken down. So there's glucose, galactose, and fructose. So glucose comes from fruits, sugars, grains, and vegetables. Galactose is in dairy. And then fructose is in fruits, sugars, grains, vegetables. And then the acronym there is high fructose corn syrup. So I know we don't want to eat a lot of that, but that is another, it gets broken down into fructose and then used for energy for our body. Okay, so this graphic is just a basic graphic to show how when we eat something, how we use it for fuel. So we've got this little, I hope you guys can see my mouse, but we have this little Pac-Man that's eating a strawberry. And so then the strawberry goes down into that bigger blue circle, which is your stomach. And so then it gets all digested and goes through your digestive system. And now we want, everything's been broken down. It's in the form of glucose. So we want that glucose to get inside of our cell so that we can use it for fuel. So this red arrow is pointing to the smaller circle with this little knob on it. So the smaller circle is a cell, and the little knob there is an insulin receptor. So in order for the glucose to get inside of your cell, that insulin receptor has to be unlocked. And so the only way for that to happen is for your body to release some insulin, which we call a key. So it unlocks the insulin receptor so that that glucose can go inside of your cell and make energy for you. So we need that energy to just do all the things that we do in a day, to get up and make our beds and do our laundry and go to work, walk the dog, all that stuff. We need energy. So that's kind of the real basics of when we eat something, how we get fuel out of it. Okay, so then what about cancer cells and sugar? What happens is, so we've got a cancer cell here, and all these little blue knobs out there are your insulin receptors. So cancer cells have more insulin receptors than a healthy cell. So that's how, where this concern of sugar feeding cancer, you have more insulin receptors, so more glucose is going into that cancer cell than it would into a healthy cell and giving that cancer cell fuel. Okay, and as I've said, insulin is made by your body. Where we get concerned is if, your body is making extra insulin, it's considered a growth hormone, so it can tell things to grow. Okay, so we've kind of got two things going on. So first, like I said, your cell has more of the insulin receptors, so it is using more. The cancer cell has more insulin receptors, so it is going through more glucose or more fuel. And then the other thing is the insulin. The insulin as a growth hormone. So this is more if you have an issue of insulin resistance. And so I like to use the example of, let's say I'm going to drink a soda and I have insulin resistance. So I drink that soda. It's kind of like a rush of sugar into my digestive system, and then it gets into my bloodstream. And since I have insulin resistance, my blood sugars are gonna be running high, which means then my body is making more insulin in order to bring my blood sugars back down. And so the concern is that, since I have insulin resistance and I'm making more insulin, I have more of that growth hormone. Compared to, like, I use the example of soda, if I was to eat a piece of fruit and it's got some fiber, and let's say I paired it with a cheese stick, which has some protein and some fat in it, I'm not going to have as much of, a high blood sugar and then an insulin response. It's going to be more balanced out because I'm eating the whole food. It takes a little bit longer to digest. I've got fiber in there with the protein and the fats. Is going to change, kind of like that, I guess, rush of sugar into the bloodstream. Okay. So in addition to, like I was saying, that insulin being a growth hormone, having more insulin also increases those inflammatory hormones that I mentioned earlier and can suppress our immune function. So several things going on there with insulin resistance. Okay, so this is kind of just saying the same thing that I've already said. So excess sugar intake can cause me to gain weight, have more of that adipose tissue. The more adipose tissue or fats tissue I have, that's what causes insulin resistance at our cells. So if you look at these little diagrams here on the bottom of the slide, the one over on the left is kind of showing like how things should work. So you've got your cell, the light blue box in the cell is the insulin receptor, the dark blue box is your insulin. It's unlocking the cell so the sugar can get in there to be used for energy. When we have insulin resistance, what happens is that, I remember I called insulin a key, the key no longer fits. So you've got that light blue box, it's not the same shape as your insulin box anymore. So you have more insulin in your body, and you also have more sugar because it can't get into the cell. So one, you've got, again, that insulin growth hormone, and then two, the excess sugar making high blood sugar just increases inflammation. Okay, so I want to talk about keto for a minute, because, it sounds like after I've said all this, like, well, we shouldn't be eating, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, cause more insulin resistance, and sugar increases inflammation. So I do want to talk about keto. So what is a ketogenic diet? There is a clinical diet, and it is 5% of calories from carbohydrates, 20% of calories from protein, and 75% of calories from fat. So most of your calories and nutrients, come from fat. On the diet, there's very minimal to no fruit, no grains, no dairy, no starchy vegetables. So mostly it's meats, vegetables, and fats. So that's kind of the clinical defined diet. When you get on the when you get on the internet and start, looking up a ketogenic diet, or maybe you followed one, they kind of range from, how it's followed. So it's not always as strict as these numbers. So what happens is your body changes the fuel source from glucose to ketones. Your fat is converted into ketones for that fuel. So this all sounds like it makes sense. Like why wouldn't we do this? We're not eating the glucose. All that stuff that I talked about isn't happening if we take the carbohydrates out of our diet. And then if you have followed this, or anybody who's followed this, you may have heard of the keto flu. And that's really what's happening is as your body changes from this glucose fuel source to ketones, you have a drop in blood sugars, you have maybe a little weakness and fatigue. Most people tell me it lasts about a week, and then they kind of adjust to, their body kind of gets used to using the ketones for fuel. There's a couple reasons that this diet is successful. It is very filling because 75% of your calories come from fat, and often because you're no longer eating carbohydrates, your calorie intake is lower. And then there's really no portions or calorie counting, so that makes this diet appealing and maybe a little easier for people to follow. So I know it sounds like I might be promoting a ketogenic diet. I do not, but I like to think of things in pros and cons. What are the benefits? What are the cons? And then give you a little more information after that. So benefits. I cannot argue that people lose weight on a ketogenic diet. And so if we're talking about, what I was mentioning before, like insulin resistance and blood sugar control, it makes sense. If you lose weight, you're going to get those benefits. That maybe some improved cholesterol. What I have seen is in the beginning, their cholesterol improves because of the weight loss and reduced calorie intake. But then with the high fat and high meat intake, then that cholesterol goes back up. You're not eating any simple sugars. So you've cut out candy, cookies, soda, all those kinds of things. So that definitely would be a benefit. Is it an anti-cancer diet? So what I've seen so far is that it's really conflicting. Maybe there's some benefit in regards to that initial weight loss, reduction in inflammation, improved blood sugars, reduced insulin resistance. What we do know is that eating high-fat diets increases cancer risk of many cancer types. We also know that diets that are high in meat consumption increase cancer risk. So at this point, with that conflicting information, I can't say yes, the ketogenic diet is the one to follow. Okay, so then my concerns with the ketogenic diet, it's really low fiber. Most people end up constipated just because you're not eating any grains, you're not getting high fiber fruits and vegetables. Benefits of fiber: improves cholesterol, improves blood sugars, prevents certain types of cancer. And then thinking about how do your food choices on a ketogenic diet. So you may have heard the term dirty keto. And so that really means you can eat all the cheese and butter and pepperoni and bacon and ham and big steaks and all that stuff that you want and still lose weight. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a healthy eating pattern. And then just thinking about, your gut health and your immune system. So when you probably have heard, you want balanced, those, healthy gut bacteria, make sure your immune system work better. And so you get a lot of your good gut flora or, gut bacteria from eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fermenting dairy products. So you've cut all of those out. And so what happens to your immune system and its ability to fight infection and fight diseases when you've cut out all of those foods? If you do have diabetes and start a ketogenic diet, most of the time people have issues with low blood sugars, especially if they're taking any diabetic medications. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies are a concern because of the lack of fruit and vegetable intake, and people are at higher risk for kidney stones. What's the long-term effect on your heart health and that overall inflammation that I was talking about earlier? Just eating a really high fat, maybe high salt, processed meat diet, how does that affect your health long term? And then, as with any low carb diets, it really does affect your metabolism. So, as with all of them, as soon as you go off of them, you typically gain the weight back plus a few more pounds. So that's always kind of concerning for just overall long-term health, and is this diet sustainable? And then my other recommendation is, most dietitians don't recommend a ketogenic diet, but if you decide that you are going to follow this eating pattern, I actually recommend that you do work with a dietitian so that they can make sure you get all your vitamins and minerals, work with you on if you're having constipation issues, and also talk about kidney stone prevention. If you have more questions for me about the ketogenic diet, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. So along those lines, I just want to touch briefly on fasting, because that's another popular one right now. And it's kind of along the same lines because it tends to also be more of a low carbohydrate, lower sugar diet. So it's been around for a long time. It kind of became popular in 2012 when the book, The Fast Diet, was published. And then over the last few years, it's definitely gained popularity again as an eating pattern. There's different, once you get on Google, there's all different kinds of fasting regimens. These are kind of the two popular ones that I think I see most of the time. So there's the 5-2, which is you basically don't fast, but you restrict to 500 calories a day for 2 days of the week. The one that I see most often is fasting for so many hours of the day. So the 16-8 is you fast for 16 hours and then you have like an 8-hour eating window. And most people sleep during that fasting time, so they're not like up for 16 hours trying to fast. And like I said, there's many other fasting regimens. I think this is appealing since there's no diet. It's really just based around like times of when you do and don't eat. Okay, so then I'm going to go along the same pattern of, pros and cons. When you compare a fasting diet to other calorie restricted or low fat or low carb diets, really the weight loss rate is the same. So it is one intervention for weight loss, but I haven't seen that it's more beneficial over other, a lower fat, a lower carb, lower calorie eating pattern. If you do have diabetes, you definitely want to make sure you're talking to your healthcare providers if you start fasting, because you can end up with low blood sugars. I have seen some information out there that there is an improvement in cholesterol, and really I think this is due to just a reduction in calorie intake and weight loss, and not necessarily something specifically from the fasting is causing the improvement in cholesterol. It's just the overall reduction in calorie, fat intake, and weight loss that improves cholesterol. Okay, and then what about as an intervention for cancer? So the thought behind fasting is that you are starving the cancer cells. There is also a thought that, maybe the cancer cells are more susceptible to treatment if you've fasted before treatment. And possibly could reduce side effects. There's not really enough science out there to say, you know, yes, fasting is a good intervention. What I typically work with people on is if it is something they want to do, you know, like make sure that you're not losing weight because of fasting. That means you really need to follow a healthful eating pattern during your eating windows. And this is more specific towards somebody going through treatment. Like I know people use this as a weight loss intervention, but for somebody who's wanting to use this during their cancer treatment, you know, you're going to have to focus on what are you eating during your eating window. You need to get your protein in, you need to get your fiber and your fruits and vegetables, all your vitamins and minerals, so that you have a healthy functioning immune system and you're not losing muscle mass, those kinds of things. Fatigue is a problem with fasting, especially if you have I've worked with some people who have pretty physical jobs, and so that's a concern. If you practice fasting long term and you're not making, you know, really good healthful choices during your eating windows, you have issues with malnutrition, vitamin and mineral deficiency. So again, if this is something that you are wanting to do, most dietitians aren't going to recommend it, but I do recommend, again, you seek out a dietitian so they can work with you to make sure you're getting high quality foods and your essential nutrients during those eating windows. Okay, so I want to move back to talking about foods that have carbohydrates in them for a minute. Okay, so this is just a picture of, you know, a typical pantry. And all of these foods contain carbohydrates. And so you can see we've got, you know, kind of like junk foody type stuff here. We've got like Oreo packs and cookies and juice and crackers and potato chips and all that kind of stuff. And so thinking about this, if these are the foods that, you know, when you'd say, okay, I'm gonna try the keto diet, and let's say you remove all of these foods, yes, you're going to lose weight. But when I talk about eating foods that contain carbohydrates, you'll never hear me say don't ever eat a cookie. But this is not what I mean when I talk about, you know, whole foods with carbohydrates in them. So this is where I get into, you know, carbohydrates are not bad, grains are not bad. We've heard for a long time, like, don't eat white things, don't eat grains. And I think it's more because of, like, this tends to be, for some of us, can be our typical, you know, choices of carbohydrates. So if you look at this picture, you know, there's kind of a big difference here. We've got a donut and a croissant and a cupcake versus a bowl of Raisin Bran, oatmeal, a whole wheat pita that has vegetables in it. So there's kind of a spectrum here of carbohydrate choices. And then if we take it one more step, you know, here we have some whole grains. We've got rice, we have corn, we have quinoa and millet and bulgur in here. So these are, you know, really whole grain carbohydrate foods. So there's definitely a spectrum on the carbohydrate foods of things that we eat and can include into our diet. So just wanting to show those pictures, kind of, you know, coming back from the argument of, you know, why I don't promote a ketogenic diet. There's just a lot of different carbohydrate choices we can make out there that are going to give us some healthful nutrition benefits. And so this chart here is from that same chart that I showed you earlier. It's just a different snip of it. And what I wanted to show you is just a little bit about the grains, fiber, fruit, and dairy section. So the first column has this turquoise box, which means there's a probable decreased risk, and it aligns with eating whole grains. And so that's specific for colorectal cancer. There's some light green boxes here, which mean there's limited evidence, but suggested decreased risk of eating foods that have carotenoids and vitamin C and beta carotene and citrus fruits. All of those things, there's, you know, possible decreased risk of different cancer types. Let's bump down to breast cancer. So we've got a light green box here, which is a suggested decreased risk of foods containing carotenoids for postmenopausal breast cancer. And so really those carotenoids are going to come from your fruits and vegetables and some of your grains. So just kind of to make the argument of, you're getting some good nutrition benefit from including those in your diet. Okay, and then along the lines of, that promoting fruit and vegetable intake, is it beneficial to go as, vegetarian or vegan? Do you need to consider that? And so just want to talk about that for a few minutes since I've hit on the fruits and veggies. There's some evidence that a vegan diet may reverse heart disease. Vegetarian diets have been shown to reduce the risk of colorectal cancers. A vegan diet may help to improve certain types of arthritis. Just putting that up there because that would be a reduction in inflammation. Vegetarian diets are associated with a lower risk of heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. So, they may be beneficial in regards to reducing some of that insulin and obesity and some types of cancer. The American Institute for Cancer Research recommends consuming 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. So just wanting to make the argument again of including a variety of fruits and vegetables, including those that contain some carbohydrates, are going to give you a lot of those antioxidants, fiber, good gut health benefits. So kind of the message I want to make here is eat more plants. A lot of these studies where they show the benefit of, following a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, they do take someone that starts with, they call this SAD diet, but they're eating a poor diet, or SAD is the Standard American Diet. I think that's what that acronym stands for. So they're taking someone who's following the Standard American Diet, and then they're making this huge diet change. And so you are going to see some of these benefits. What I haven't seen yet to say, like, yes, everybody needs to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet is someone who's following, what I like to call a plant strong diet, and then switching over to vegan. Are they getting that much more benefit? I don't think that the evidence is there to necessarily say that everybody needs to do that across the board. But there are some benefits to eating more plants. And so just so you have these definitions, when I talk about plant-based diets, I mean plant strong. So that's just an emphasis on consuming more plants. There's vegetarians. So vegetarians typically still consume dairy and eggs. And then vegans do not consume any animal products. So if you do decide to lean more this way, then you need to, work on getting more plant-based proteins in. Make sure you're getting your calcium, your iron, and B12. And the reason I put this more food prep in is, we do hear plant-based diets, I do think are popular right now, but I don't know that that's for everyone. Not everybody wants to be chopping up all these vegetables and doing all this food prep in the kitchen. There's convenience ways to do it. I think there's a balance of using, salad kits and frozen veggies and getting, half your plate fruits and vegetables and having some, now and then having like some canned fruit on there because you don't want to chop up a melon or, just kind of keeping it simple. But getting more plants in would be kind of the main benefit. And this is really just, if someone decides to go vegan, you really need to make sure you're being mindful of where you're going to get your protein and your calcium from. And then most vegans need to take a B12 supplement because that does only come from our animal products. Okay. All right. So then along those lines, I do want to talk about meat for just a couple more minutes. And I know this is going to sound like I'm promoting more of a vegetarian diet, but really the argument I'm wanting to make is just the plant strong and being mindful of our portion sizes of our meat. So if you look over here to the right, there's a lot of yellow boxes, and the yellow box definition is there's limited but suggested increased risk of several cancer types. So lung, stomach, pancreas. And so the columns here are red meat and processed meats. And really, this is daily consumption of red meat and processed meats where we start to have this increased risk. When I'm talking with people, red meat is not off the table. Having red meat one night, having chicken the next night, having some seafood, then maybe doing a plant-based protein, getting some variety in. So this information is really for daily consumption of processed meats and red meats. So again, focusing on variety, more plants, variety of different proteins, all kinds of vitamins and minerals to give you a really healthy immune system. I didn't put up the boxes related to breast cancer because there wasn't any in regards to the meat consumption. They didn't have anything on the specific chart to offer. Okay, so since we're talking about plant-based diets, I just want to quickly touch on soy because I know that is still a concern. So I get asked does soy increase estrogen? When I eat soy, do I have more estrogen in my body? And actually, soy contains phytoestrogens. It does not contain estrogen. Early on, many years ago, there were studies that showed that rodents consuming soy had an increased risk of ER-positive breast cancer. Later, it was found that rats and humans metabolize the soy differently. And so it's actually protective for humans to consume soy in a whole foods form. Human studies have shown no increase in cancer risk in soy consumption, and soy has actually been associated with a decreased risk of recurrence. So for those that are concerned about soy, I hope that clears it up. Some of these studies where people consume a lot of soy products, they're eating more low fat, higher fiber, whole foods, less meat. So just keeping that in mind too, it could be a specific eating pattern. Soy has a nutrient in it called genistein. It's an isoflavone, and it's a natural antioxidant, and it may inhibit growth of mammary carcinoma. And then also that word I said earlier, angiogenesis. It's an anti-angiogenic nutrient. So it inhibits that blood vessel growth to tumors and promotes that natural healthy cell death that I mentioned earlier. So there are some health benefits to consuming soy. We talk about it's perfectly safe to eat 3 servings of soy foods a day if you want. So a serving is a cup of soy milk, 4 ounces of tofu, half a cup of edamame. And we encourage foods or whole soy foods. So soybeans, soy milk, soy nuts, tofu. I don't know how whole tofu is, but the point is, when you start looking at more of your processed foods, it always has that soy protein isolate in it. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about eating soybeans, having soy nuts, tofu, those kinds of things will get you those health benefits. And the soy protein isolate doesn't have that same protective effect, and neither does soy protein powder. But if you want to use soy protein powder to supplement your diet, that's completely safe to do. Okay, so just kind of recapping healthy nutrition guidelines. So eating for a healthy immune system and a healthy gut. You want to have a diet that has at least 30 grams per day of fiber. Eating all types of plant foods, 5 servings or more a day, including more whole grains, non-starchy vegetables, fruits, legumes, beans, lentils, and also including your starchy vegetables. And again, it's really just consuming them as whole food. So having potatoes and corn and sweet potatoes, all those things can be included as, whole foods, carbohydrate sources. Like I've already kind of hit on, just limiting your consumption of your processed foods that are high in fat, your processed starches, things that are high in sugar, that's going to decrease some of that overall inflammation. The red meat recommendation is to no more than 3 portions per week. So again, that speaks to that consuming a variety of protein sources. And then consume very little, if any, processed meats. Limit your consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. And then for cancer prevention, it is recommended to not drink alcohol. Okay, and then I like pictures. So we've got like our typical American plate, and then they have this kind of transition plate. So you can see the differences that you've got, half a plate of beans there instead of, 2 servings of starchy vegetables. So you've got your rice as a grain, a smaller portion of meat, and then half a plate of green beans. And then the new American plate, and this is from the American Institute for Cancer Research. So there's chicken on there. You've got, 2 to 3 servings of vegetables and a brown rice. So just kind of moving more in that plant strong direction. Okay, and then I briefly, I've got a spelling in there, error in there, sorry. I just want to talk about exercise really briefly because another thing to work on to reduce some of that inflammation and insulin and leptin is increasing our muscle mass. So the more muscle mass we have, it's going to reduce that adipose tissue that I was talking about at the beginning. I like to give a definition of what when we say like, I want you to do cardio and strength training. What does that mean? This is not saying like you need to go out and do this today. Everybody is at their own fitness level. I just like to give like a reference, basically, like when you hear from, maybe you're working with a trainer or you have met with your doctor and they're saying you need to get more cardio in. Well, what does that mean? So really the recommendations are 150 to 300 minutes per week at a moderate intensity. Some of us are wearing, the Fitbits that keep our beats per minute. So you can kind of check and see if you're getting in that 130 to 150 beats per minute. And then the time is cut in half if you're working at a high intensity to 75 to 150 minutes. So that would be getting your heart rate up to 150 to 170 beats per minute. Like I said, not everybody is at that level. It's totally fine. You start where you're at, and these would be goals to work towards. And then strength training. So the more muscle, you want to work on building more muscle mass, 2 to 3 days a week. Okay. All right, and then I like to just briefly touch on physical exercise and activity. So there is a difference between, like our physical activity is any movement we do during the day. So when I, walk out to my car, I walk to my mailbox, I throw in a load of laundry, that is all physical activity, which is good. And then exercise is like planned, structured, intentional movement. So when I intentionally go for a walk, when I intentionally go for a hike, that is the definition of exercise. So we need both, is kind of the point I want to make. Okay, so then just to kind of bring it all home, the big key here is weight management. When we are managing our weight, we reduce our adipose tissue, we have improvement in blood sugars, less of that insulin response, reduction in inflammation. And really to do that, eating a balanced diet, following a healthy lifestyle to promote weight management. And when we talk about superfoods or specific food types, I always talk about like adding those in as extra. Do all these, eat a balanced diet, exercise, follow those plates, eat from all the food groups, and then add in the superfoods as extra. If you don't necessarily have to eat kale and blueberries, but if you like those, throw those in too. And then again, this is from the American Institute for Cancer Research, and these are their recommendations for cancer prevention and prevention of recurrence. So again, that working on a healthy weight, moving around, eating whole grains, whole foods, limiting your processed foods, limiting your processed meats, sugar beverages, limit alcohol. Yeah, so just kind of the point of the whole overall package. And then this is the resources I used for the presentation to get the information. And like I said, if you want more information on some of those charts that I showed, you can go to this website, this dietandcancerreport.org, and you can get, if you want to delve into that, that's a good website to check out if you're interested. Okay, And thank you guys for listening. And I'm going to turn this back over to Annie, and please put your questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Athena. That was awesome. It's packed full of information, and I can't wait to listen to the recording. First off, I wanted to do a sincerely apologize to our audience as well as Athena for not having the Q&A and chat box available during today's presentation. To work around this, we will be sending out an email very shortly that will include the post survey as well as an opportunity for any comments, questions, feedback for Athena or the resource team to be sent back to us. That will be going out very shortly. You might already have it in your inbox actually. So please follow up with us with any questions, comments, and feedback. We really appreciate it. And just some brief information regarding the Resource Center. We are located in Albany and Corvallis, can be reached by phone, as well as our website and our email address at cancerresourcecenter@samhealth.org. Please contact us if you'd like to be part of our newsletter that goes out monthly. And here are a couple of upcoming events. We have Surviving Breast Cancer and the Cancer Journey with Holly Almond, and the lymphedema presentation with our specialist, Cindy Davis. Again, thank you, Athena, so much. We will be following up with any emails that we receive shortly. And thanks so much for attending.